Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and former MP Anna Soubry and The Sun's political editor Harry Cole. So a very good evening to both of you. Nice to see you both.
Evening.
So let's take a look then at what's making the front pages. And the Metro leads with the head of the UK Vaccine Task Force telling Sky News it's possible that every adult in the country may be able to be vaccinated against COVID-19 by August or September. The Eye reports that an additional 1.7 million clinically vulnerable people have been told they should shield for 6 weeks, but the aim is to give them greater priority for the vaccine. And The Guardian has that same story as its lead. The Telegraph hears lockdown won't be substantially relaxed until the number of new virus cases falls below 1,000 a day. The Mail reveals what it says is the government's roadmap out of lockdown, but says the whole process will take until July. The Mirror speaks to the loved ones of care home residents who plead to be allowed to see them after nearly a year. And the Financial Times has a story concerning an upturn in fortunes for the global mining industry. So Anna Soubry and Harry Cole here with me to go through some of those headlines. And Anna, there's an awful lot of COVID-related headlines once again, isn't there? And you've picked out the Metro, first of all, which actually features an interview done by Sky News' own Sam Coates with Clive Dix, talking about, he's head of the Vaccine Task Force, isn't he, about the prospect of all adults getting both their doses earlier than expected, potentially.
Yes, it's extraordinary. But on the other hand, in a way, it's not extraordinary because this is a remarkable success vaccine rollout. There's no debate about that. But the idea that all adults could have it, both jabs, remember, that's both jabs by the end of August, terrific good news. But I think there are some consequences from all of that, because I think as soon as we begin to see the majority of people getting their first jab, then the pressure will grow and grow to an extraordinary level, in my view, on the government to ease the restrictions. I just think that people will say, I've had my vaccine, I'm now going to get on with my life.
Well, yes, that's interesting, isn't it?
Whilst it's good news, it could cause trouble. It could cause some trouble for the government.
And we'll talk about some of those pressures on the government over the lockdown easing timetable in a moment. But just on this issue, Harry, Clive Dix, obviously in charge of this body which identifies and buys vaccine on behalf of the UK government, feeling optimistic about the supply. There's talk about the fact that they took this kind of portfolio approach. They got a number of different options. So there's some confidence coming from him, but clearly the rollout is important and people coming forward is important too.
Yeah, this is a typically brilliant interview by Sam Coates, who's got Mr. Dix to say the one thing the government didn't want him to say, which is actually things are going brilliantly. There's been a new broom in Downing Street, shall we say, over this year, really, since Christmas, since the turn of the year, to try and get Boris Johnson to stop being so optimistic publicly and actually under-promise and over-deliver. And it seems the cat has been let slightly out of the bag here, but it does seem to be a sort of growing feeling in Whitehall that the speed at which the target was achieved to jab the most vulnerable with their first doses was hit very well. There's whispers that actually the number of jabs available and the supply chain of jabs will be massively increasing into March, where we'll be able to see a million a day. But as Anna makes the point so well, the government have got to keep a lid on this, because the last thing they want is everyone to suddenly think actually this is over and they can go down to they can carry on with their lives as if nothing has gone wrong, and that could actually knock the whole rollout off course. Anecdotally, and who can blame them, I think that we're seeing more and more sort of older people who we haven't seen all year really out and about in the shops, in the parks, and who can blame them? Just really there's a really thin line between this rollout being sort of on target and achievable and getting those numbers down, and everyone actually breaking down the order, relatively good order we've had over what's been a horrible 12, 18 months now of restrictions.
Yeah, really interesting, the whole psychology of it, isn't it? And Anna, just on this subject of the rollout of the vaccination programme, The Guardian is picking up with the story, a couple of the papers do this as well, of the fact that more people are being added to the list of people being told to shield, and they'll move up that vaccine priority list as well. And it's quite interesting how this has been determined, hasn't it? Different risk factors are being taken into account.
Yes, including, I don't think I'm meant to use the word poverty anymore. I've never understood why. But the fact is that you are twice as likely, if you live in a poorer area, to suffer the worst symptoms of this horrible virus than if you live in a more well-off area, to put it in crude terms. But it's really, really important. And to see the expansion now of that people most at risk, to include people from backgrounds which make them more vulnerable, I think is again very good, very positive news. And I know it's been welcomed by the BMA, who were campaigning for this, because just as we identified that older people were more vulnerable to the worst symptoms going into hospital, some of them dying, so it's been true that people from certain ethnic backgrounds have had that same difficulty. And as I say, people who come from poorer areas also. So this is good, this widening, 1.7 up to 2 million. Again, that's good. And I think it goes some of the way to alleviating some of the quite right criticisms that perhaps the group looking at it, it is an independent committee, but they have not looked in the way that many would have wanted them to look at, for example, young adults and children with special needs and disabilities, and that they too now should be jabbed. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it, really? The government's doing, and the NHS, a terrific job in rolling out the vaccine, but now it means that people can start to look at it with a more critical eye.
Well, yes, and the whole debate about the priorities will rumble on at every phase, no doubt, of the rollout. But I want to take us on to the Telegraph next, Harry. And you talked, both of you, about the pressures with a successful rollout on the government to talk about easing of restrictions. The Telegraph says lockdown to continue until cases drop below 1,000 a day. So this is the number of cases, isn't it, Harry? How will that, what kind of reaction might that get?
Well, this is something that the medics, the scientists have been pushing for behind the scenes, we're told by various sources, and it's interesting that it's a health correspondent that has their byline on that story and not a political reporter. I always think there's an interesting criminology where, for nerds like me, when things like that happen. But if you actually look at the graph, it's a very striking front page. But actually, if you drill down into the numbers, about 1,000 cases a day is where, touch wood, we really hope to be by the beginning of April. And the current trajectory that we're on, if you look at the horrific numbers between Christmas and the New Year, where 80,000 people were being confirmed to be having coronavirus with a positive test in one day, and look where we are now in the sort of teens. You hope we would be pretty soon into 1,000 a day, and it sort of tallies with what we're hearing on. Yes, there'll be a very limited easing of restrictions in March the 8th, and then 2 weeks later, a little bit more. We're thinking sort of, a couple of beers in the park with one other person, perhaps. Obviously, schools being first, but perhaps a little bit more outdoor exercise. But actually, April is the sort of penciled in marker for when the poor, blighted, crippled hospitality industry can begin to even think about reopening. And actually, you would hope that we would be on about 1,000 cases a day by then. So hopefully that is, that is where we'll be.
And a very quick thought, Harry, picking up on what you said about a health correspondent reporting this. Do you mean this is likely to be reflecting what those in the scientific and the health community want?
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's this. Obviously, the Prime Minister has been very clear that he wants this to be the last lockdown, so to speak. We're not going to do this again. We're going to go steady and easy to make sure we don't have to go back into lockdown. And the scientists have turned around and gone, all right, but here's the reality of that is actually you've got to be below a certain level by that point, or you risk leaving the embers burning, and we lock down again. We unlock again. We have a brilliant summer, and wham, we're back to where we were, this time next year.
And the Mirror, Anna, also reflects some of the pressures that the government's under. That these stories, let us visit loved ones, and they talk about the number of people in care homes who haven't had visitors. And there is that kind of those real stories that so many people have been suffering for so long. You know, that puts extra pressure on, doesn't it?
Yeah, the chap on the front page of the Mirror, I think he's called John, isn't he? John Ross, and he's aged 89. And the photograph, which you can see, shows him a year ago with his wife, and then his photograph today. And it is really a telling sign of the terrible toll that COVID's had, not just in terms of the actual illness, but its consequences by people like John, who's in a home, not being able to see his wife. And I think the pressure will grow, as both Harry and I have said. The political pressure. Actually, I think the pressure in the country at large, once the jab is rolled out, for people to say, you know, if you've got the jab, then for goodness sakes, for people like John, why shouldn't he now see his wife? And I think that the other thing to add into all of this, if I may, is in May, there are going to be elections throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. And I think Boris Johnson, putting on his political hat, will want to be able to make sure that he has got good news April coming up to May to help him get the bounce he'll need in those May elections, because they are across, as I say, the whole of the United Kingdom. So politics will loom large in his roadmap, which he'll unroll next week.
Yeah, interesting. So much at play. And yes, Monday's going to be fascinating, isn't it, when we hear from the Prime Minister. We're going to take a break right now. Coming up, though, Boris Johnson apparently wants to appoint a minister to keep the union together. But will the Scots be won over? We're going to be talking about that in just a moment. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me tonight, Anna Soubry and Harry Cole. And Harry, we're kicking off this section with another story on the front of the Daily Telegraph. PM urged to appoint Cabinet Minister for Union. So talk us through it.
Feels a bit like Groundhog Day, this story. So obviously it's all hands on deck in Downing Street with the new union unit set up to try and counter the ever sort of increasing popularity of the SNP that's causing real worries for Boris Johnson. You know, it would obviously be a career-ending loss to be the PM that presides over the breaking up of the union. So the Dunlop report, which is a report into how the union can be strengthened, that's been kicking around Whitehall for a while, it's leaked to the Telegraph, and its big reveal, its grand suggestion is let's create a minister for the union. Now, there's only one problem in this, in that we've all written this story so many times. Boris Johnson himself, during the Tory leadership election in 2019, vowed to make himself the Minister of the Union. And in fact, he did change his title. He is now Prime Minister of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, the Minister for the Civil Servant, the First Lord of the Treasury, and the Minister for the Union. And, a lot of good that seems to have done so far. So the idea of creating yet another cabinet level job, apparently at a par with the Treasury or the Home Office or a great office of state, does seem a little bit like replacing the sort of saltire indeed, but saltire deck chairs on the Titanic. I just think they're going to have to try a little bit harder than this to turn their fortunes around north of the border.
I think you should get bonus points for remembering that full title. That was quite impressive. Anna Soubry, is it a good idea to have a minister for the union?
No, it's a nonsense. And it's just meaningless rubbish, isn't it? And I noticed also the Telegraph says it's going to be a big beast, a cabinet big beast? Well, presumably not a member of the existing cabinet, because there aren't any big beasts in that cabinet. It's one of the biggest problems that we've got
colleagues you're talking
in
about
tackling
there.
the COVID. And therefore, you could argue I speak with some authority on this, because I do know a large number of them. But this lack of big beasts, especially in a crisis, actually I think is a real problem that has bedeviled this government. But in any event, look, Boris Johnson is a huge problem for the union. He is a part of the problem, and the growing rise in the nationalist cause in Scotland. So it will take more than a minister for the union to sort out those problems. But if there was to be anybody who should be the minister for the union, I could see that as a very good job for Ruth Davidson, because she's either just gone into the Lords or she's about to go into the Lords, isn't she?
Okay.
But it takes more than a minister to sort out the problems for the union. I mean, these are colossal issues, and they are not going to go away.
Okay.
And they're not certainly going to go away very quickly or easily.
Harry, we've only got 20 seconds, but we just want to show page 2 of the Metro. This is the headline is "Vet sacked by Navy over his sexuality gets his medals back." Very brief thought on that, if you can.
Yeah, I had sort of had to pinch yourself reading the details of the story and seeing the reports on Sky today that this was only 25 years ago, 20 years ago in some cases. This feels like something out of a history book and shows just, how phenomenal the speed of change has been in the last 2 decades. But, one small step with medals now, real justice is needed with wallets and pensions and all sorts of things like that.
And I can see you
Absolutely
nodding there,
right.
Anna. You agree?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
OK, and we are out of time. But Anna and Harry, good to see you both. And you'll be back again at 11:30 to go through another selection with us. Thanks very much indeed for now. So let's take a look then at what's making the front pages. And the Metro leads with the head of the UK Vaccine Task Force telling Sky News it's possible that every adult in the country may be able to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by August or September. The Eye reports that an additional 1.7 million clinically vulnerable people have been told they should shield for 6 weeks, but the aim is to give them greater priority for the vaccine. And indeed, The Guardian has that same story too. The Daily Telegraph hears lockdown won't be substantially relaxed until the number of new virus cases falls below 1,000 a day. The Daily Mail reveals what it says is the government's roadmap out of lockdown, but says the whole process will take until July. The Times understands there are plans to roll out mass testing to people's homes in an effort to speed up a return to normality. The Mirror speaks to the loved ones of care home residents who plead to be allowed to see them after nearly a year. Meanwhile, according to The Express, the Queen believes Prince Harry will honour his personal loyalties and royal protocols in an upcoming interview with Oprah Winfrey. The Financial Times has a story concerning an upturn in fortunes for the global mining industry. And The Star splashes on darts players choosing Pilates over pints. Anna Soubry and Harry Cole here with me to go through some of those front pages. And Anna, a lot of different angles to the ongoing COVID story. You've picked out the front page of The Times to kick us off. And this is talking about plans they say are afoot for more mass testing to try and give us more freedom. So what are The Times suggesting is going to happen?
So they're speculating that in this roadmap that the Prime Minister is going to give details of next Monday, that one of the things that he will announce is that there will be 400,000 lateral flow tests that will be sent to people's homes or to their place of work a day. I mean, that's an extraordinary number. And it's as if finally the testing and tracing system is going to catch up somewhere near the success of the vaccine, because test and trace has not been the great success that it should have been. But it's an extraordinary number, 400,000 a day. That means 400,000 people a day getting tested at home or in their place of work. The concern will be that that test is not as good as the other test, which is a laboratory test. But this test, this lateral flow, takes about 30 minutes for you to get a result. But it's critical, whatever your views of the government's handling so far of the COVID crisis, that testing and tracing is absolutely as important as the delivery of the vaccine if we're to get the sort of thing that we want, which is a return somehow to some form of normality.
Harry, with the head of the Vaccine Task Force telling Sky News tonight, I think it makes one of the front pages as well, that all adults could potentially be fully vaccinated, i.e. both doses by August or September. The question then is to what degree that gives you extra freedoms. The Times article suggests that the government is focusing on this idea of testing, giving you greater freedom, rather than perhaps some kind of vaccine passport to use at home. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, we've been pushing on this, sort of day in, day out, really, for the last sort of couple of months, really, are the government looking at vaccine passports? If so, how are they going to work, and if not, why aren't they looking at them? And up their sleeve seems to be this mass testing, and there's a sort of ocean of speculation tonight about what could possibly be coming in the next few months to help us out of lockdown.
We're
But
going to swim in
this
that
Times
ocean
report
very
does look
shortly,
particularly
aren't we, Harry?
well sourced. In terms of the Prime Minister's talked about this before. Back in, I think it was the last time we were sort of coming out of lockdown, back sort of July last year, he started talking about Operation Moonshot, which was this idea that, you know, taking a COVID test could become as normal as brushing your teeth in the morning before you go to work. And it's not necessarily about you know, the ability to go to a football match or the theatre or the cinema again. It's actually about getting people back into offices, into workplaces, which is an underlying fear that that, you know, cities and towns will never ever be the same again unless there is a dramatic increase in the number of people who, you know, lots of people got quite used to working from home and quite like it. It's how can we get people back into mass situations again, not necessarily leisure, but actually for the economy. So the government have quietly been spending absolutely bucket loads of cash on this, and there has, as Anna rightly said, been a real issue with lateral flow tests because they're not as accurate as a lab test. Now, someone I was speaking to the other day said, yes, that is still the case. They're getting better, but hand in hand with the vaccine, actually, that sort of 5, 6, 7, 8%, you know, sort of error, sort of margin of error you get on some of these cases isn't as critical as it would have been if there hadn't been a vaccine. So actually they can now start to be rolled out for more everyday use. And actually the private sector has been using these, you know, for a fair few months now to privately test their workers. And it looks as if finally the government, as Anna says, is catching up and test and trace, which, you know, the testing capacity is massive now. 800,000 people a day we can test, but the tracing isn't there. But if people can do it in their own home before they leave home in the morning, it will make all the difference in the acceptance, really, that COVID is going to be with us forever. It's not going to go away, but you know, how we tackle it is, you know, is you know, a very fluid, very fast-moving situation.
Well, yes, and the Financial Times, though, meanwhile, Anna, says some employers draft no jab, no job contracts as business left to go it alone. So even though there's these suggestions that tests might be the way to free things up, there seem to be some employers that want to have contracts for their staff, potentially. What do you make of that? I
find it very difficult to understand how you could work in a care home and not have had the vaccination. I just find that quite extraordinary. Now, it raises huge issues, and no doubt it will be a bit of a minefield for any lawyer. But as I say, I think there are certain jobs, in fact, you know, a lot of health workers, social workers, people who are dealing with and working remarkably with some of the most vulnerable people to COVID. It's difficult to see how you can do that job and not have a vaccine for any good reason, because you are posing a threat to them and indeed, of course, to yourself, your own family, and for the whole of this project, which is effectively to build up antibodies in as many people across our country. And of course, we should be going beyond right across the world as we can if we're to get back to normality. Can I just say one thing, actually, which I do find is quite interesting, is that in all the front pages, the number of deaths is tucked away as an aside. 799 people died from COVID. It's still an extraordinarily high number. But as Harry has pointed out, of course, the one thing that Johnson wants to achieve, or rather he doesn't want, is that third wave. And so-called Spanish flu back in 1918 had a third wave, which wasn't as deadly as the first wave, but wasn't far off the second. And he's keen, rightly, to avoid that.
Well, yes, and we should remember, as you say, those figures, because those are, you know, all individuals with families and loved ones, aren't they? And we should always have those at the front of our minds. You're absolutely right. But that desire by the Prime Minister and the whole country, of course, to not have to go back into a third lockdown, presumably affecting how he decides to come out of this one, Harry. And the front page of the Daily Mail has... fact or speculation, you tell me about how that might look on Monday when he talks about his timetable?
Yeah, I mean, this is with the greatest respect to a deadly rival newspaper, it's what we call in the trade a bit of a mosaic. They put lots of different bits together and then slapped a big headline on it saying "revealed." This is the plan. It's not the plan. No one knows what the plan is. In fact, the plan hasn't even been signed off yet. So it's a good pun. It's good sport. And the government actually left themselves slightly open to this in the fact that they announced that in 3 weeks' time, 3 weeks ago, they would announce a plan. So they've created a bit of a vacuum there, which is obviously going to be filled. This story actually seems to be coming from less from government and more from the hospitality trade, and it feels like they're a bit miffed by some of this aspects of it, because there's this phrase in there which is things won't be back to normal until July. Now, I think that's quite ambitious, in the fact that there is an argument that things are never going to be back to normal as we know it. There for a lot of people, they're going to come, get back to normal, wait for that local pub to reopen. It sadly isn't going to reopen because it's gone bust. It's this idea that there's going to be a flick of a switch and overnight things are the same again. I just don't think it's going to be like that. Now the roadmap, I think, will have some I think it'll be quite vague. Ironically, for a roadmap, I think it will be reliant on certain criteria being met, and as you said, and as Anna said, it will be at a very, very cautious pace, because they want to have they want to give the vaccine a chance to bed in, to show that it works, to prove that it works for any lifting of major restrictions. And when you look at things like Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, has said about social distancing and mask wearing and sort of sitting outside for the foreseeable future, you really have to take a hefty pinch of salt every time you do see that phrase "back to normal," because the new normal is going to look very different to the pre-pandemic world.
Yeah, and on that rather sober note, we are going to take a break right there. But don't go away, either of you. Lots to talk about in just a moment, including, has the BBC done the right thing by saying it won't prosecute over 75s for failing to pay the licence fee? We're going to be talking about that next. And Anna, we're kicking off this section with a story inside the Metro, aren't we, about a Navy veteran in this case, but his story repeated, no doubt, many times over. The headline there, vet sacked by Navy over his sexuality wins back medals. What's your response to this, as someone who's been a defence minister?
Yeah, I was a defence minister, and I mean, I'm quite speechless in a way on two counts. First of all, I mean, it is extraordinary that less than 30 years ago, people were thrown out of the armed forces for no other reason than they were gay. I mean, it is unbelievable, but it happened. And it meant that when they were dishonourably discharged, it is really quite disgraceful, any medals that they had or any recognition of service. So that gentleman in the Metro is called Joe Orellis, I think he pronounced his name. In any event, he was a veteran of the Falklands. He served in the Falklands. He did 6 tours of duty in Northern Ireland, and his service was just wiped away, humiliated, heartbroken, left penniless. Mercifully, now it is that these terrible wrongs are being righted, and good to see Ben Wallace, who's the Secretary of State there, restoring what is due to him. But there is another fight now, which is to make sure that these wonderful people, all of them, get their full pension rights and their pay restored to them. It's, I think, the very least that we can do. And I just wish that we'd done it when I was a defence minister. We had another big issue, which was another injustice to do with with widows rather, and their pension rights. But this is another huge injustice, which, thank goodness, is now being righted.
OK, yeah. So, and let's move on, Harry, to another story on the front of the Daily Telegraph, which has taken your interest. BBC declares television licence amnesty for over 75s.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is, the last thing the BBC would want to do. It's probably going to spin it as a great, kind thing. But in fact, it's almost because it's unenforceable and they were facing a massive backlash. Anna will remember this better than I do, but this all stems back to the great sort of austerity days of George Osborne versus the giant bloated government spending. And he basically the government used to pick up the tab for BBC license fees for over the 75s, and he, in a piece of quite deft negotiation, somehow managed to get the BBC to take this onto their own books. And once they realised quite how expensive that was going to be, all hell has broken loose over the corporation, and this is sort of seems to be the inevitable end game of that in a row that's been running for as long as I can remember as a journalist. That's probably close to 10 years.
10 years, I was going to say, I think I remember it going for even longer, perhaps. Anyway, on that note, before we get down the alleyway of how old I am, let's wrap things up, shall we? Anna and Harry, always good to see you both. Thanks very much indeed for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.